Okay, maybe. Okay, thank you. All right, so that particular, I guess you call it method of meditation is called mindfulness. Mindfulness is not the technique, and because you probably hear that term a lot. Just to be clear, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is what they call in the, it's really a Buddhist technique or developed by Buddhist tradition. It is the word that we translate from the actual classical languages as mindfulness. It originally means something like memory or to remember something. And so it is a quality of the mental consciousness that has the ability to draw to mind. We use the word recollect, which means to remember. And even the word remember, we just think of that as like, oh yeah, that's something that happened. I'm aware of what I ate for, earlier today. But when we say remember or recollect, that has actually, even in English, the implication of I'm pulling something back together. I'm calling it to mind. I'm bringing it into my awareness. So mindfulness is a quality, when it is a really thorough mindfulness, of being completely aware of an object of our attention. So it's our attention that we're learning to become familiar with, the fact that we are constantly paying attention to one thing or another. So in this particular sort of set of meditations, the thing that you're trying to do through the practice of mindfulness is to become aware that everything is occurring in consciousness. Consciousness is not the breath. Consciousness is not the thing, any more than it's the sound of my voice. But most importantly, it is not the emotional state that arises as a result of some kind of thought that you had about something. And the more that you engage in that particular method, the more that you become sensitized, become discriminating about the difference between your simple awareness and your open experience and those events which occur in consciousness, and particularly your emotional reaction to them. Why is that important? Because according to the yogic traditions, and this includes the Buddhist and non-Buddhist yoga traditions, our entire problem as living beings boils down to mistaken identification with, meaning I think I am this emotional state. Let's say emotional state of intense like or intense dislike. The intense dislike and like, either one of them, is associated with a quality of experience that's called craving. So the word literally is thirst. And the Buddha described it as being like either the thirst for total existence or total annihilation. So we are basically in a constant state of wanting something to always be there or for it to be eradicated. What I don't want to be there, I want to eradicate it. What I do want to be there, I want it to always be there. And then they further go on to say that the reason that we actually have that underlying compulsive craving is because of the most fundamental misidentification of all. And we all share it. And it's called the misidentification with an I, with a self, with a me, with a mine. The me, mine, self that we identify with and that we crave does not exist. It simply doesn't exist. So yoga practice is like yoga practice can mean so many different things. Some of you have explored other kinds of yoga practice, or you've been to places where they teach things other than, say, asana. And so you may be wondering, what do these things supposedly all have in common? Well, the process of yoga then is like as a process of inquiry. It's a process of discovery, right? And that inquiry process is often described as being like, peeling an onion. You're like constantly peeling and seeing what's underneath that. So I had a very negative experience of something. What was inspiring that? Where did that come from? Well, I peel back and I find something underneath. All of the yoga practices are about giving us methods and techniques of stabilizing our minds so that we do not compulsively default to craving and attachment. When we are in a state of craving and attachment, meaning I absolutely must have that in my experience, or I absolutely must remove X, Y, or Z, then that inquiry process is completely shut down. It's gone. Impossible to know. So it just purely in terms of sort of modern, psychological language, this is about finding, what your underlying motivations are. What are your, what is driving you? Because of course, if you have an underlying sense of lack or dissatisfaction, unease, and you furiously move through life trying to fulfill that sense of dis-ease or bring ease to your life, but you don't know what actually is causing your unease, you are doomed to failing to make any progress in that. So the methods of yoga are then, as I said, ways of allowing us to intelligently, critically, and effectively investigate what the lower and lower layers of the onion might be. As you peel the onion, the biggest contribution, though, to that's just simply the therapeutic model of yoga, right? Is that we know ourselves. We get to know more about ourselves. We get to have more and more insight. Sometimes this style of meditation is even called insight meditation, the premise being that you are going to have insight, see what makes you tick. But the real then radical contribution of particularly the yoga tradition that we practiced this morning called Ashtanga yoga, which has been heavily influenced by a couple of different, systems of or traditions of thought, including the Buddhist and the Vedanta tradition, is that as you peel down the onion, you get to the core and there's actually nothing there. Either there is something that is ineffable and cannot be described by our normal sense of our normal language, or according to the Buddhist tradition, there's actually no real self there. There is only an interdependent relational self. Doesn't mean we don't exist at all. We just exist relationally. But that's kind of anyway, it sounds a little bit, it is abstract to talk about it like that. So I thought just in this morning, to go to some very, very basic topic, which is, what is yoga? What do we think we're doing? What are we trying to do? So yoga is defined in traditional sources as being a few different things. I'm going to identify three main ones. They're the most commonly identified ones. One is that yoga linguistically is identified with the verbal root yuj, which means to connect or to unite something. So it's the uniting of something, something with something. So it's related, the word yoga is related to the modern English word yoke, or the old English word yoke, like a yoke that connects two oxen, something that keeps something together. So a yoga can simply mean a connection. Yoga then, from that point of view, like as a therapeutic process, could be the integration of your mind and body. That's sort of like the throwaway kind of new agey line about it. Let's say it's integrating my mind and body. You know, you tell me what that's supposed to mean, because honestly, I don't know. Most traditional sources don't say that. They say that yoga means samadhi, which means concentration, like profound, stable concentration of the type that no longer is making a fundamental misidentification of the contents of consciousness with consciousness itself. So simple. So this again gets into certain pre-ideas or presuppositions of the yoga tradition. We exist at our most basic level as just consciousness or pure awareness. And that state of awareness is considered a good thing. It's a good thing because all of the aspects of life that are suffering have to do with a misconception, the assumption that things are permanent when in fact they're impermanent. The misconception that things that that would provide us, they think they would provide us with happiness, in fact, are sources of suffering. And most importantly, that things which we think have a self, have an enduring, permanent, non-relational self, we think that they do have a permanent and non-relational self, including me, most importantly. I exist regardless of my relationships and regardless of my actions, and regardless, I am always a stable being. I've been the same person, the same individual, the same self since birth. So the deep state of concentration, yoga as samadhi, or a deep state of concentration, is yoga as a method for bringing us into a stable, discriminating awareness, where we are no longer making that misidentification, like I said, with the contents of my awareness and mistaking that for me. When we do the meditation, for example, you over time will notice that anything that you become aware of, you become aware of it in, as I said in the meditation, kind of in exactly the same place that you become aware of any sensation, the physical sensation or the stimulation of some auditory stimulation. Now that's not too radical to accept that. Like all of that you're just simply aware of in the same place. What is fairly radical is that you still believe, and I do too, that there is a me in there that's doing the being aware of that thing, that I am somehow like a little me, mini me is in there. And I'm directing my attention to these things, that I am me, and I'm bringing in this intention, and I'm bringing, whereas even the sense that I have, that I am me, the sense that I have a face, the sense that I have an external body, all of that is also simply occurring in consciousness. And based upon a set of stimulation, sort of an entire process that is occurring in my awareness, I am constructing a sense of self. The Buddhist tradition talks about how we construct a sense of self out of 5 life processes. There's no actual enduring non-relational self, but I construct one at all moments during my existence. I construct it out of matter, feeling, like actual sensory feeling, sensation, how I evaluate that feeling, like hot, cold, so forth, emotion, and then finally consciousness, which is the space in which all of that occurs. And out of that, I'm constructing a self. But I don't walk through life thinking that I'm constructing a self. I think of myself as being absolutely, statically, permanently, identifiably who I am. And based upon that, I think that when I'm angry, that anger is real. It says something real about me. And it's that identification with certain stimulation, especially emotional stimulation, emotionally charged stimulation, that then based upon that, I act in the world. And I act in order to fulfill certain objectives, to make this sense of self fulfilled. Whether it's to fulfill that sense of self by giving it what it craves, like to what it desires, or by allowing that sense of self to avoid what it dislikes, what it can't stand, or to be indifferent about what it's indifferent about. The problem with that model of living a life and trying to carry out a life that is fulfilling is that it's doomed to failure. It's doomed to failure because it's predicated upon fulfilling a self that you made up in the first place. So if you made this self up in the first place, and the only way to fulfill that non-existent self is by constantly associating it with the objects of desire and fulfillment, the avoiding of those objects which would cause it any distress. Because of the very nature of the world as a changing place, everything is impermanent, we will be confronted incessantly with dissatisfaction and suffering. So going back to what the idea around our yoga practice is, that we're learning ways of being able to say, yes, I have a strong emotional reaction to something that's happening right now. And I have some distance from it. I can see it as a pattern of energy. I can feel its, I can see its contours. I can see how it is trying to force me in a certain direction in terms of my behavior. Maybe to lash back out, maybe to chase something, chase approval, chase a new sexual partner, to chase a certain objective. But if you are being forced to do that by your sense of self, again, you are doomed to suffer. So yoga from the very start is saying a couple of different things. It's saying we exist in a way that we are mostly completely oblivious to. We have no idea because we think that we are a discrete, non-relational self, discrete meaning like individual, whereas we are not. We are a construction. We are a process, let's call it that. We are individuals because of the process, of a unique process, no doubt. It's unique. Your process is not the same as mine. But that we have a way of modifying our who we are in our experience at all times. The second presupposition is that in the same way that we can sort of infinitely make ourselves dissatisfied and unhappy, by making this fundamental error about what is real, what is, about especially thinking that something that is really not there and is not real, thinking that it is real. By the same token, we can also, there is no limit to our ability to transform ourselves in positive ways. No limit. So this conscious state that we try to identify with, I said, drop back and be that state of awareness. That state of awareness is described in various traditions as being completely blissful. This is total awareness, is perfect as it is. There's nothing that needs to be added to it. There's nothing that can be taken from it. It is fulfilled and perfect as it is. In the Buddhist tradition in particular, because I am fulfilled, I recognize that I have no need as to feed, there's no care and feeding of a self that doesn't exist. So that means that everybody else here, everyone else that I encounter, all other beings, all animal beings, all human beings, they're experiencing the exact same distorted view of themselves and of everyone else around them. They're suffering for that very reason. This is a very powerful exercise when you see someone has done something very hurtful to you. And I'm sure you don't have to think long to find some example of this. You find an example of somebody that has done something hurtful to you, and you genuinely expand your compassion to thinking of how they are a suffering person. And in fact, and you may just think that they're a terrible, terrible person. And indeed, they may be a terrible person, but that they are themselves a suffering person. And that doesn't mean that it gets them off the hook, that they don't have responsibility for their bad behavior, that they don't even deserve some kind of punishment. But it does mean that, like you, they are just simply trying to make themselves happy and avoid suffering. That is the universal condition. We're all trying to be happy. But according to the yoga traditions, the only surefire way to actually achieve that goal of becoming happy and avoiding suffering is a twofold process: identifying what is real and what is false, what is real, particularly what is false about the sense of self, and dropping that, and then engaging in actions which continue to support your real understanding of the world, which would be, for example, oh, you lack a self as well, but you don't know that. And so you're acting in accord with trying to get the world completely on your terms, and you're suffering as a result, and you behave badly as a result. Maybe you're even injuring other people because you are suffering. You injure others because you suffer. So this is where the emphasis in Buddhism in particular comes in on what they call compassion. Compassion isn't a good thing just because it's nice to be nice to people in some universal sense. When I am kind and compassionate to others, it reinforces my sense of what is real, which is that they lack a self as well. And it reminds me of my lack of self. A final third description of yoga is to call it what they call upaya. And upaya is the last, it means a skillful means of doing something. It means just a method of doing something. So it's method. And this is the part that I wanted to leave you with today, is that we have in our we take on a yoga practice usually because we had some good experience with it. I don't know of anybody that keeps doing it if it just doesn't feel at least slightly good, because that's like just weird. Like, and people do weird things all the time, and don't get me wrong, but continuing to come to yoga class while hating it is not something that I'm so familiar with. I know of other things that they do while they still hate them, like they stay married, for example. Or they engage in friendships where they cannot stand their friends. That happens all the time, but they don't really go out of their way to go to yoga because it feels good. And so this is the really, really a great place. This last third definition of yoga as a means of transformation is a good place to start thinking about, I think, your own yoga practice. There's a paired set of terms that go along with this term, that go along with yoga as method or yoga as means. This set of terms are goal and means to the goal. Or in Sanskrit, it's easier, it kind of fits together nicely, because goal is something called sadhya, the thing to be achieved, and sadhana, which is the means of achievement, the means of achieving. And a sadhana, or a means, is always linked to its thing to be achieved, right? They're linguistically related. And because it's not coherent to talk about, oh, this is a method. Well, a method for what, right? A method for doing something. It has to be for doing something. And when we engage in yoga practice, this is the part that I think might be helpful, is that it's really, really valuable and probably at some point necessary, if you're just not going to lose interest in it, that you consider what your goal might be. And it doesn't have to be, I'm not saying like it needs to be the goal of enlightenment or a goal of, total, lasting, blissful, dissolving into universal consciousness. Just simply some kind of goal that is appropriately matched with the method for achieving that goal. Because otherwise, you are just going to be making tons and tons of effort without any direction. And it'll be tiring and it'll be frustrating. And also, it's okay to be wrong. You can very much like set out a provisional goal for yourself. I'm going to do, or a provisional goal, not necessarily that it's wrong, but a provisional goal that becomes outmoded at some point. That becomes like, you grow beyond it. So the most sensible one right away is you do it for good health, which is incredibly good reason to do yoga practice, right? So it's good for your nervous system. It's good for your internal organs, and it's promoting a sort of well-being. It typically helps you to look nicer, you look healthy, therefore you look more attractive to other people. In all sorts of ways, being healthy is a good thing. But at some point, then you would wonder, well, why is that a good thing? Exactly why do I care whether or not I'm a healthy person? Because you're not, then it moves into the other aspects of yoga, which sometimes we call like the ethical aspects. Well, you're doing it to care for other people. You're doing it so that you don't become a burden to others. You're doing it so that you can be more effective in your daily life at reaching out and being a source of solace or of support for those around you. Then we get to, in the yoga traditions, right away, various different kind of approaches that say your ultimate goal is like whatever, to know God or to to know reality as it is. I think all of that can, you can safely bracket that, and just say, I'm going to do my yoga practice with a particular goal of intention to do the best possible thing for myself. And I'm going to think about how that being kind and helpful to myself connects me more intimately and fearlessly to others. Because as you start to feel better, as you start to be healthier, as you start to, or even if you're not getting healthier, it could be that you remain very unhealthy. That's also very possible. Yoga is like, it's entirely possible that you could have problems, medical problems, that yoga won't fix. It's entirely possible. But still, you are seeking to develop your ability, going back to the beginning of what I said, to peel the layers of the onion intelligently and to start to know what is motivating me, what is compelling me, because then we make decisions based upon our true interest, not just our interest, which is a zero-sum game of the more that I have, by definition, the less that you have. You start to recognize what the yoga texts will say, which is that the more you give away of what you have to give, the more fulfilled you are. It's kind of, ironic and strange and surprising, but that is the claim. And it only makes sense if you start from this premise, if you start from this recognition that you are complete and full and exactly perfect already. And you start from there and then turn back and say, so what is my big problem? Because you do have a lot of problems, guaranteed. If you're anything like me, you have a lot of problems. Okay. All right, so that's all today. Thanks, guys.